Good day, and welcome to our webcast, 5 Steps to a Safe and Compliant Workplace, brought to you by CFE Media and Technology and sponsored by Interfore. I'm Kevin Parker, an editor with Plant Engineering. Here are some tips to help you get the most from today's webcast. If you're experiencing issues with your slides or audio, refresh your browser or click the Refresh Media button directly under the presenter's picture. You can control the volume of this webcast by adjusting the volume of your computer or of the webcast platform. If you're having technical problems with audio or the slide presentation, click on the question mark at the far right, top right corner of your screen to access a list of system checks. If you do need a technician, type a message in the Ask a Question box and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. Type questions for our speakers in the Ask a Question box. The live Q&A session will begin after the presentation concludes. Today's webcast is being recorded. You will receive an email within a week with the link to the on-demand event. To download a certificate of completion, a PDF copy of the presentation, and additional resources, use the Event Resources tab. These documents will also be available with the on-demand version of this webcast. Now let's hear from the sponsor of today's webinar, Interfore. At the conclusion of the video, you may experience a few seconds of silence to compensate for varied internet speeds. Please stay tuned for today's presentations.
We won't overcome unprecedented challenges without extraordinary compassion. As you navigate these trying times, know that we're here for you. Committed to helping you adapt and grow. We're committed to health, safety, compliance. We are working hard to provide the support and services you need to help you protect your employees and to keep operations running smoothly. Your collaboration makes this possible. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your trust in us. Together, we will come out of this stronger than ever.
I'd now like to introduce today's presenters, Kevin Price and Rob Schultz. Rob is the manager of IT PMO services at Interfore. He's been managing IT projects in the forest industry for more than 20 years. Rob currently leads deployment of Interfore EAM across Interfore's operations, including 8 successful implementations complete to date. Kevin has more than 20 years of experience in the enterprise asset management solution area for Interfore, serving in leadership roles in sales, services, development, and product management. Kevin is technical product evangelist and strategist for the Interfore EAM portfolio, and he's based out of the Interfore's development hub in Greenville, South Carolina. Thanks for joining us today, gentlemen, and Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parker, and thank you very much for attending today. We're really excited to get the chance to share with you a little bit about what we're doing around the technology of EAM. More specifically, as our world changes, our world evolves, a new normal gets defined, and we start to rethink how we have done business and what's it going to look like going forward. In this capacity, what we're going to be speaking to is some elements of how we return to work, and more specifically, what technology's role in it will be. So in these kinds of things, you're thinking about what can I do around preventative maintenance? Maybe I go review those differently. Maybe I review how people enter and exit my building. Maybe I look at it on how we have touch points or automation. All of that comes to play, and we're going to try to talk to some of those as we start to go through. Worker safety, speaking at it from the Interfore perspective, is paramount, of course. But speaking about it from an Interfore perspective is why we have Rob here. Excited to learn what he's doing, what his organization is doing, and really what it's going to look like going forward for him. Many customers are experiencing these types of revisits and how they do business and why they do business, and the way they have been doing, how it's going to change. And the people on the phone today are no different. I mean, you guys are seeing the same kind of thing. So we'll go through these two topics and hit some questions towards the end that'll be moderated by Kevin Parker. One of the things that we have at our disposal, however, is the chance to get interactive. So this is a chance for you to participate with us. As you start to look in this slide here, you'll see it's a survey question. Real time, man. You start to look at this and think about it and put in your response. It's going to be a great way for us to be able to see back and forth. So take a look at this question really quick. Let me read it for you to make sure you understand the question and a little bit more of the answers. Reopening businesses and maintaining business continuity during the pandemic will require developing, implementing, and maintaining a new, more rigorous safety plan. Do you have a well-defined plan in place today? And it's okay if you don't. Some people do, some people don't. Some people got to go find out where that plan is because it's another department, it's another group. No worries. Take your time. Look at what you have to say. Your options here are no. We have given it some thought. Yes, but it's the same plan that we had before the pandemic, so it really hasn't changed much. And that's okay because some industries already have these kind of things covered well. Yes, and we're discussing how to update it, which is probably the most common what we've seen around at least our space, and we interested to see here. And then down the bottom, yes, and it has been updated based on our new regulations. The regulations component is interesting because it constantly changes and goes through. So as we take a look and see what these responses are, it's interesting to see because we really have what we kind of thought would be out there would be shown. It's a lot of people saying yes, and it's been updated based on the new regulations. That's wonderful to see. For us, the regulations out there aren't necessary compliance elements, but what they are more so is guidelines and recommendations and things that are constantly changing. So it's tough. Or next to that, yes, and we're discussing how to update it. That's probably a little bit more common that we've been seeing, at least in the space, but we're here to kind of go through it together and as we start to get familiar with it as we build through. So let's talk first about the technology and out there and its role in returning to work. As we think about the trends that we have in technology, especially as we hear from our customers, our user advisory boards, our experience boards, our vertical boards, we think about really four things right now. And we always have, but it's done under a different lens for sure. On the bottom up, we see a supply and demand that's changing. So how do we balance the labor and demand in this particular environment? What we mean by that is getting new folks brought in and getting them up to speed and getting them to work takes a little bit more effort. There's more PPE that you have to consider in some industries. There's more steps, there's more qualifications, there's more education. You need to make sure when you have that person brought on that he or she is trained not only in the environment and the tools and the operations that you have to have he or she do, but you also need to make sure that he or she is educated on how to keep oneself safe and others that are around them. The touch points need to be lessened. Health and safety is really where that comes into play. So how do we return to work with our existing labor force and do it in a safe way? We have a lot of folks that are doing temperature gauge reads or infrared gauge reads before people come to work. Heck, people have to rethink how they take breaks, how they schedule breaks, where they take breaks, just a whole bunch of different things. So we think about how to document that with technology, how to adapt to it, meaning that how do we enable people quickly so that they can be able to quickly come back to work as the economy starts to open up especially. And then within all of this, what do we need to do to digitally transform what we do? And the meaning behind that is because typically you'll run into automation. What levels of automation do you have? How can you take advantage of those pieces of automation? Because automation tends to do what it does best, is it removes some human touch point. And this could be your advantage going forward, is if I can remove human touch point, I can get the data that I want to be able to take, maybe I can operate in a safer way for my people. So we start to think about using these touch points understanding these touch points, getting the data that we need that were normally out there by folks, living, breathing, and touching those pieces of equipment or working with them, and we start to think, well, can we use this technology better to get condition, as an example, better? Can we use this technology better to make sure that our people are ready and enabled? What we're finding is that the key to that survival and recovery is to optimize how those assets and technology interact at the same time. So do I have SCADA systems, process logic control systems? Do I have building monitoring systems? Do I have building information systems? Are there systems where I can get this data and reduce the number of human touch points, for example, and still get the optimization that I want to be able to see? When we think about that, we really have to go back to say, okay, there are assets out there that I can collect data for. But you have to always go back to the same question of which assets should I focus on? And you always tend to do that, right, in a development process of a product or a service. You think the ones that carry the most impact to the revenue that your organization produces, whether it's through a product that's being manufactured or processed, or it's a service that you provide that produces revenue, those are high risk assets, and you want to make those run as much as they can. In this environment, the work's changing, and it may not be that those carry as much risk and as much priority as they did before. You may have to look at other things that may carry different types of risk. So you always want to go back in this changing environment to identify that risk and identify the priority of the asset structures that you do have. And then once you do, the next step, of course, is trying to understand those assets as much as you can. When were they installed? When were they touched? When were they modified? What is their current condition? What is their future condition? And when do I know it's going to fail? Or when can I predict when that comes through? So these are a couple of things that have always been the case. And what's changing too is the workplace, right? Is adherence to new compliance standards. And compliance standards and regulations, there's some that are out there that are coming through that many industries, especially some of those you'll see in food and beverage, chemical, life science, pharma, they're already hypersensitive to these types of things because that's the operation that they've been operating in for decades, if not more. But some of them are some of those other industries, or maybe some within those industries, still have some change to make. They need to go back and think about what compliance and regulation means to me, especially in this environment where it's not necessarily compliance and regulation now. It's guidelines and recommendations. So you think about this evolution of risk prioritization, condition assessment, work management execution, and then you start to look at, okay, I got those updated. I've looked at how I can change those. I look at how I can build that out. The next question is, how do I visualize this so I can make sense of it? How can I take this structure that I'm getting data into the system and really optimize it in terms of getting the data I just need? Everyone always says if you have a data lake to put data in, do it and worry about what you can make of that data later. And if you've already been doing that, you have a massive pool of data. Now it's the question of how do you dig into that data? What kind of business intelligence can you derive? What kind of workflow automation can you derive? And it all brings to the top right, which is asset performance and planning. So it gets my assets to perform the best they can in the most efficient way, the most cost-effective way, the most optimal way, and the most even energy efficient way, if that's a goal too, which for many people is starting to go through now. So this is all an evolution. For number one, it's a modified, reviewed evolution because of the new challenges that we're faced. And if you already have a continuous improvement initiative involved in your organization, you're already looking at those types of continuous improvements and evolution anyway. I mean, that'd be old hat for you. But if you look at yourself and you think, okay, when's the last time we revisited this kind of stuff? And when's the last time we revisited what's important and what's not, and where do we focus? This may be the time, because odds are good. We see a business continuity disruption like this, we're probably going to see another one. And it may not be a pandemic, or it may. Depends on where we go in the future, but it certainly could be something like a hurricane, a flood, a tornado, an earthquake that comes through. I mean, Lord knows we've had everything thrown at us in this year, and we're not even into fall. So there's a lot of things to consider that we may not have looked at before. So let's take a look at this next question for you to participate in. If you get a chance to put your response in, it'll help us out in a big way. Take a look. The survey question here is state, provincial, and federal health authorities are making frequent changes to their guidance, guidelines, and requirements for post-COVID cleaning and sanitizing. What degree of confidence do you have in your organization's ability to stay current with these changes? And we're not approaching names or anything. It's just a number to be able to gather through. So if you get a chance, please take a look. And some organizations, highly visible ones, trans agencies and things like that, the best thing to do is make it transparent and visible. You want to see proper signage. You want to see proper social distancing in place and markers and things like that. Other ones you may not, but let's take a look and see what these survey results are real quick. Perfect example. Large percentages here of 76 to 100%. We got almost 40% of people. And if you really add those together, we have a large group here, that 26 to 50 and above folks that have a degree of confidence in your organization. So as you start to get that push to you and take a look, what you'll see is probably what you would expect. People are taking this return to work very seriously. They're taking steps cautiously, not reactively, very pragmatically in terms of what is possible in their organization and what they're capable of doing. And you should expect that. As a good steward for the economy and the capital environment that we live in, the free markets that we live in, we don't have a lot of choice in order to survive, in order to continue to compete. But at the same time, we all have socioeconomic responsibilities, right? To be able to do what's right to keep ourselves safe, secure, an environment where we can come in every day, do what we love doing, and do what we're proud to do, and be able to make a difference in not only our own lives, but the lives of everybody else. And with that, what I'd like to do now is pass it over to the guy who's doing that right now as we speak. And the guy who's really been doing that for his professional career is bringing to work a passion, and execution, and attention to the details that are required to move towards goals like these. Rob, all yours.
Thank you, Kevin, and good day, everyone. It's a privilege to be here, and I look forward to sharing you the Interfore story for our worker safety during this pandemic. So just to look at the agenda of what we're going to be discussing this morning, just a brief introduction to Interfore as a company, and we'll talk about the impact of the pandemic on our operations, some of our employee protection strategy measures that we have in place and governance that we're adhering to, and then our employee protection on-site measures that we have, other protection measures that we do, and then what the new normal may look like in the near future. So who is Interfore? So Interfore, many years ago, was called International Forest Products, if you're curious where the name Interfore came from. So the name was condensed to a shorter version probably 15 or 20 years ago. We are headquartered in Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada, and we're one of the largest forest products manufacturers in North America. We have 17 sawmills and value-added wood products manufacturing mills in British Columbia, the Pacific Northwest, and also in the southeast of the United States. And we produce all varieties of dimension lumber in a variety of different species, depending on what's locally growing in those areas. Southern yellow pine in the southeast, hemlock cedar on our coast, and then also in our interior areas in the western part of North America, spruce, pine, and fir products as well. So we have about 3,100 employees and about 1.4 billion in revenue, according to our publicly released figures. And next slide. So COVID, as all of us are aware, came out of very quickly at us, and the initial impact for us is that the market basically froze for us, and we also had a number of health authorities describing lockdown conditions that had to take place, and so we experienced during those initial lockdowns a sudden curtailment in operations because we had to basically make sure that our workers were protected, and even though we had product to sell in our inventory, where we would ship it to, our customers couldn't receive it anyway. They were also in lockdown. So the industry basically took a bit of a freeze mode for probably several weeks there during the initial stages of the pandemic. What we had to do to protect ourselves economically was reduce our inventory that we had on hand, our finished inventories. So again, we carefully were managing the market demand as well during those initial startups, again, when the market restarted, just to make sure that we weren't overextending our capital and to make sure that we were going to be viable for the long term. Because as we all know, and we still know, that the future is uncertain, and so we need to be careful in terms of how we manage our operations. So after several weeks of uncertainty, the good news is that demand returned to the forest products market. Believe it or not, all those home office renovations and time at home to build decks and repair fences, well, that certainly was a contributing factor to the market demand for our products. And we are experiencing growth in all parts of our company across all regions. And so it was actually good to see, and quite surprising, to be honest with you. We weren't certain that we were going to have that kind of demand when the pandemic first began. Our employee exposure, fortunately, we didn't have any employees exposed to COVID-19 for the first several months. But with recent increases in cases that we've seen in North America, unfortunately, some of our employees have been exposed to COVID, either in their own families or they themselves, and that is presenting an impact, of course, to our operations. So our Interfore's employee protection strategy, it hasn't changed, right? Our employees are our greatest assets, and the health and safety of our employees has and always will be our number one priority. Every time anybody enters one of our facilities, safety is front and center. That's the message that is there. Every worker needs to return home safely at night or at the end of their shift, whenever it may be. And so that's the message that we carry through, regardless of the pandemic. So our governance models that we follow, yes, we do. So we operate in several different states and provinces. Of course, so we have to, be aware of what the current rules and regulations and guidelines are, and we adhere to those to the letter. We don't, from our company standpoint, we don't make up our own rules or do our alternative research. We rely on the experts that are available to us and provide those guidelines to us, and we respond accordingly. So we have another number of protections on site as well, even though we have perhaps regional differences in the number of cases, for example, between U.S. and Canada, we still treat every mill and our protection of employees the same way. So we want to make sure that each employee, regardless of the risk of contracting COVID or bringing it to the site, we protect all of our employees the same way to the highest level that the health authorities require. So we have a number of measures that we've implemented in our mills, and there's probably around 3 different themes of how we try and protect our employees, specifically against the COVID, the pandemic. With protection measures, in other words, masks and gloves and those kinds of things were required. We also employ isolation, so we limit the attendance in meeting rooms. We limit the workstation location of where people are standing in the mills and doing their work. We've distributed those where we can to spread them out, to isolate them. And in other cases, we've also removed positions from the mill itself. So, for example, a lot of our administration work from home and are not required to be on the mill site. Fortunately, we have good technology, and EAM being on the cloud certainly lends itself to that portability for us, so that we can do that. We have temperature checks that we require every employee, whether you're in the head office in Burnaby or whether you're walking on a mill site, the same requirements. You have to do a temperature check and a short survey around your contact history with COVID. We have lunch breaks they must do if you're going out for lunch as typically some people do in the mills. They have to do that alone. We can't share rides in our maintenance vehicles. Some of our facilities are quite spread out, so we have vehicles that we use to get from one end to the other on occasion. And we've implemented a no ride sharing policy for those facilities as well. And cleaning protocols are under an enhanced schedule and regiment now. Fortunately, what we have in each of our mill site locations is we have an environmental health and safety coordinator at each site already. And so that gives us good coverage when it comes to implementing and also enforcing these protection measures for our employees. So other things that we're doing as far as protection measures, employee meals, no use individually packaged foods, no catering. Those employee lunches that we have are, especially we celebrate safety in our organization, and so many of our mill facilities are used to having safety lunches when a previous month or a previous period was accident free. Unfortunately, those have had to take a different kind of look and feel these days, where we can't have that social gathering and celebration. It's unfortunate, but that's part of our new normal. Social distancing, trying to keep our employees, of course, apart. Fortunately, in a sawmill, we are fairly spread out. A lot of our work is also done in well-ventilated, almost open-air conditions as well. But again, we want to make sure that we mark where people are supposed to stand when they're doing their work. So we make sure those areas are specifically marked, and we post signage on meeting rooms and offices where the maximum capacity needs to be at. So what does our new normal look like at Interfor? Many of us are working from home, so I've been working from home for the most part, with the exception of a couple of days I had to go to the office since March, and which is a great savings on my fuel bill for commuting personally. But obviously, the human connection is something that we all enjoy as part of working at a company, especially the size of Interfor. We have an excellent social culture as well. So we've introduced additional ways to connect online with online socials. We've also put together a quarantine cookbook for just for people that have more time at home these days, just to be able to share in some of the the fun things that we're doing while our work environment is different. And from a technology standpoint, that's really been a lifesaver for us in terms of keeping us going and business continuity. Using Microsoft Teams and SharePoint extensively for our online collaboration and discussions. Infor EM being in the cloud is accessible anywhere, and it's and for the first time, employees that hadn't normally considered working from home, such as maintenance planners and things like that, and supervisors, they've now been forced due to some of our isolation and removal practices to move people out of the workplace. They're able actually to do some of that work they need to do in EAM from home, and then come on site to the mill for their supervisory duties, and actually have less time on site, which then reduces our exposure as well. So there's a lot of strategies that this pandemic has helped us to recognize where we can do things differently and how we work, and some of those may continue even after the pandemic. And I believe that is the end of my slides. Turn this over to Kevin.
Sure. So thank you so much for going through those, Robin, and of course, thank you for your role within the organization. It's a lot different for many reasons, but if you think also about what the organizations across the globe really are going through, or are people that are picking up batons that they didn't necessarily have before this whole thing started. As you mentioned, you already had a lot of these procedures built in place already. So it may not have been that big of a change for you guys, and it was definitely a sharpening of the pencil, I'm sure, in some areas for you, but you already had the pencil, and you already had a lot of it done, and a lot of people don't have that, or don't know where to go, or don't know where to go with it, but certainly have the same concerns. So thank you very much for sharing what you shared so far. So let's look at this next question that we have here. Survey question again, a chance for you to participate if you get a chance. Let's read it out loud for you. It's protecting your organization from business continuity disruptions, like a pandemic, a tornado, hurricane, floods, or wildfire, is critical. Has the importance in moving to the cloud changed in your organization? Now, why is that question coming up? We talked about automation as a way to look at protection against human touch point risk and things like that. But when people move around and carrying different roles now, or different balls in the air that they've got to juggle, one of the things we're finding, and you may be already having this thought in your mind if you're watching this, or a plan in place, is to move the application installation from an on-premise installation into the cloud. And it just frees up resources, it frees up time, it frees you up to focus on other things that, again, have changed now in this new normal, or have changed because it requires a different type of risk adherence. So risk not only comes with assets, but also the systems that you maintain. Some of these options here are not at all somewhat important. Doesn't matter either way. Some people have that view, right? It's important or it's critical to what we do. So the question is, moving to the cloud, has that importance changed to you? Let's take a look at some of these responses that came through. Kind of expected, a lion's share on the important response there. You'll get these pushed to you soon to be able to see, but you take a look at what the lion's share here is it's critical to the move. It's important to the move. Some of the folks looking at not at all or somewhat important, it doesn't matter, maybe your role or your environment or your approach, or from your perspective, that's actually an important response too. And the reason why it's an important response is at the end of the day, the end users that use the system, the end users that are doing transactions or doing digging in the application, they shouldn't care where this application is. It could be in a data center, it could be on the web and data zones like we'll have in different areas of the world. The idea is you need to have reliability in opening up that application, but there's a little bit more behind that, right? Whenever you open up anything, it's on some computer sitting somewhere on the internet and it's running. So having the reliability that system comes with some effort. And maybe your organization taking a look at it, they may not. But I hope you've enjoyed this time. We've certainly got some questions that we want to go through. We have some interactive ones, I think, because I think there's things that we'll go through that are not only questions that are for Interfore, but questions that will ultimately go up to Rob at Interfore, as well as some of those that are coming through, for us both to answer. So with that, I'm going to pass it off back to Kevin Parker, so you can give a.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it, and now is the time for our audience to send their questions to you and to Rob, and we'll get to as many as time allows, and we'll post online the answers to the ones we don't get to. And before we launch into the session, to download a certificate of completion, a copy of the presentation, other resources, use the Event Resources tab on the screen. Rob, I thought that was just really a great story that you had to tell about how you guys have reacted to the onset of this crisis that has disrupted our work lives beginning in the spring. And another company that I interviewed on their response to the virus SwageLock, they mentioned that they had several years before done a tabletop exercise where they kind of thought through some of the process of what they would have to do if there was a pandemic. At your place at Interfore, had you done anything like that, or talk a little bit about how you, when the crisis did arrive, how you decided on what the policy was going to be and how you rolled that out?
Thanks, Kevin. Yes, so I've been with Interfore just over 2 years now, so I don't know if a tabletop planning exercise was done ahead of time, but I know that in the initial stages of the pandemic, where when lockdowns first started coming into place, our executive team met on a daily basis to review the impact of COVID, because it was impacting markets, workers' availability for work and those sorts of things. And I believe the executive is still meeting on a very regular basis, it may be every day still, to review, the COVID situation and in all of our facilities. And because the quick reaction was important to keeping our workers safe for as long as we were able to. We don't have control over workers, what they do in their personal lives and in their social bubbles and things of that nature. But we've certainly, we do the best we can to educate all of them and also protect them and their fellow workers when they're on site.
And was there any particular place in putting the policy together that you and the executive team looked for information or sought advice?
That was largely from our local health authorities, and there are several because we operate in many regions. So we would designate our human resources department would be sort of responsible for gathering that research and putting the recommendations and plans together. And then our individual environmental health and safety coordinators on site would be responsible for implementing it.
Good. And then a final question: with the temperature checks, were there any opt-outs, or was there any controversy surrounding that as being part of the procedures?
No, because we clearly showed that the data was not being stored or recorded anywhere. It was simply done as a snapshot in time. And most of our employees know the importance of keeping people safe. It's in our culture, and so this additional, while it may be interpreted as an inconvenience or unnecessary, or it doesn't really matter. It's a company policy, and our workers are very good at complying with those.
Well, good. Thank you. That's very interesting. And again, congratulations. I'm sure we're going to have more questions for you, though, before we sign off. But let me turn to Kevin for a second now. Kevin, it seems like EAM systems have been really ended up being central in terms of what types of enterprise or transactional systems or decision support systems have been central to the response to the coronavirus. And my question for you is, how have EAM systems changed as a result of becoming the center of that much focus?
Well, it depends by industry, I think. What I mean by that is some industries have always looked at touch points to assets and conditions for assets in a very open and visible way. You'll see some of the more pharmaceutical grade type of implementations and things like that are out there that want to have complete visibility on who came to this particular asset when they touched it. There's good manufacturing process equipment that's out there that's FDA regulated and things like that goes through. Other industries, they are just now looking back into this more granularly, looking at what type of audit trail they could do, looking at more reporting that they go through. For us, in this work at least, and coming from the user advisory boards that we have and customer experience boards that we have not found a great amount of change in our application specifically, because we do a lot of this stuff already. But what I am finding is in the implementations that we have, the folks are going back and reviewing almost all of their procedures, preventative maintenance schedules, touch points, and looking at different types of things that are required for their employees. From a qualification certification perspective, they're looking to do internal permits to work before they get done. There's a lot that's been done on reviewing what's there. And then lastly is in the application, they're using a lot of the configuration capabilities to make the application less intense to capture data. What I mean by that is not only looking at automation to bring condition data in as an example, but looking at to minimize forms like on mobile, getting rid of fields that don't matter, fields that are in to make it quicker to get in and out, to be able to do a job and to leave. The core of the applications and capabilities and frameworks and stuff like that, we haven't done a lot of change. We are looking at what we can do to evolve more of the reliability functions, but that's been something that we already have on the roadmap. But our implementations that I'm hearing of and seeing at least since pandemic, back in March 13, was to really look at, everyone's processes internally and what can they do to be able to make them more safe and clean.
Great. Well, let me ask you a follow-up question. What about capabilities for remote operations? Is that's related to this as well? I think that's probably a topic that you're familiar with, isn't it?
In detail. That has been one for us as well for a long time. The web application is and how it's structured, how it works, how you access, how you don't. We've always had security steps built into it and how to deploy it. So you want to deploy with user ID password. If it's a public port, there's going to be some risks in what you do to access that. So we have secured port access, put it behind firewalls, VPN connections, all that kind of stuff to be able to make it available. But it's stuff we've always been doing. We've hosted it since 2001, so we've seen what it's like to be able to push it inside the four walls of an organization and outside the four walls of an organization. So when we went to the work from home, a lot of companies were already set and ready to go, and started doing a lot more of their transaction viewing and reporting and stuff like that already. We didn't have a whole lot of organizations that came with a struggle with that, but for us, it's something we've always tried to pay attention to make it scale.
Good. Let's turn to some questions from our listeners. This one is for Rob. Were there any problems getting employees to return to work when you first went on your, reopening path?
Good question.
Not that I'm aware of anything specific in that regard. Our layoffs were very short. We were very fortunate that way that we didn't have to curtail operations very long, and we were able to bridge salaries and things like that, and so we were able to keep a very close tie with our employees and that relationship, and the message was always positive that we were going to open up as soon as we could, and fortunately we were able to. So
that's great. This is a question for both of you, Kevin and Rob. What additional training or skills are being advocated or implemented for split remote on-site workforce? Any
Rob, go right ahead.
So certainly from a technology standpoint, we have to introduce new technology tools such as MS Teams and broader use of SharePoint technologies for our collaboration. And many of our employees were not used to using Teams at all. In our technology IT department, we had already been introduced to it, so we were well versed. So we published Microsoft Teams quick reference guides, training videos. It's easy enough to deploy those to everybody. And we rolled out Microsoft Teams in like literally a matter of 10 days or something, because everybody was needed a way to communicate during this business interruption. So
thank you, Kevin. Go ahead.
I got to echo that, because it's the web meeting access. It's that type of stuff that folks had to really adapt to, that we're hearing from at least. Because the collaboration at the time would be, okay, let's go huddle down in a conference room really quick. Let's go grab the hallway stand-up meetings really quick. Let's go in a stairwell. I've even seen folks go as a stand-up meeting for 15 minutes, but now you can't do that. You got to get everybody on the same page. And what's been interesting, though, that I've seen across the board, Rob, I don't know if you've seen this too, or Kevin, maybe even in what you do, you're a busy guy too, is folks have been working more. They've been on more calls and more updates and more stuff, because people just assume because you're working at home, it almost seems like you have more flexible time. And what we've been hearing from folks is they've had to be more vigilant in protecting their calendar, so that they have time in their calendar to actually get things done, to be able to do work, to be able to do planning, to be able to do these types of things. Because when they're at work and they're in their office, and the door is closed, don't go in there. Kevin's working on something, or Rob's setting up a schedule or doing what he needs to do. But when you're at home, you're doing that same task, but you don't have that door to see. You don't have that stuff to go on. So folks, I know, have been a bit stressed, not only by working from home and having the inherent change that goes in, but also learning how to manage and protect their calendar. I know that's been an issue for a lot of our customers, and a lot of Emporiums as well.
Well, I think it kind of leads into the question that everybody asks: what has transpired in the onset of COVID that's going to continue after COVID goes away? And I do think that more working at home is part of that. I can think of, anecdotally, a number of examples where people are returning to work, but now they have more options in terms of working at home more often. And it's kind of like, I like to find that if you need to find a sports analogy, if you've been watching the NBA playoffs, the play is really better without the crowd being there, and the officiating is better. And they were been talking about it on air. And so there's just some things that we're find are going to be better. We may never blow out a birthday cake again because that's too much exhaling and may not shake hands so much, but there's probably some good things or trends that were already present that are going to be accelerated, don't you think?
Rob, what do you think about that?
Well, most certainly. So, I mean, we've been living in COVID conditions now working in COVID conditions now for probably better over 6 months or getting close to that. So we're almost establishing a new normal when it comes to working. So if you can demonstrate you can work 6 months from home for the most part, you can probably do it forever. And as long as we're still being effective and whatnot. And we've demonstrated that in some parts of our business for sure. So we're definitely going to see more remote work that's going on. But that personal collaboration is part of, a strong part of team building. So naturally, everybody wants to get back to the office and shake somebody's hand. We've been waiting long enough to do that. But certainly there'll be more remote work and more flexible hours and things of that nature. Just to give you an example, if you look at say a family unit where you've got a working mother, a working father, and young kids at home. Well, last spring when all the schools were closed and the daycares were closed, suddenly those families that rely on school time and daycares to look after children during the day, well, you've lost that's a third of your support, right? And so it made it a huge. So what we did as a company is that we basically said all stop on any kind of regimented times for meetings and things like that, and we opened up the calendar, opened up all the flexibility we needed, so parents could work at different hours during the day, and it just sort of changed the regimented 9 to 5 to focus it more on deliverables and things that needed to get done. And on a project basis where I spend all my time, that's how we're wired anyway. But for other departments such as accounting and things like that, it just allowed them more flexibility to get the work done they needed to get done, and not necessarily during the the daylight hours kind of thing.
That's a very good point. I mean, working to milestone, working to delivery, and what we've always done that here ever since I can remember. We've always said, listen, I don't care when you work or how you work, but here's your deliverable, and when you deliver it on this date at this time, it needs to be quality. You need to be able to stand behind it. You need to be aware of it. And some of those folks, and we're hearing from customers that have done that in the past, just because they're wired for a project perspective is okay. But it's almost like you have to, for some of those folks that are in the more traditional jobs, as you mentioned, the 9 to 5, they have to rethink a little bit on how that approach is, because it can have a lot less stress. But other people just like the 9 to 5. They like that grind, and it works out for them. So you definitely really have to pay attention, at least from what I'm seeing in our own company and within our customers, to the human element that's going on, the impact that it's taking on the psychology of your employees, and then how that affects the quality of work that gets done. Last thing you want to do is someone to get really frustrated and have a heated argument with one of your customers. It's not something you want to see, but it does happen. You got to pay attention to it for sure.
Good. A specific question kind of coming out of that, Kevin. What are the additional security measures that must be implemented for EAM and remote work?
Well, a little bit was addressed earlier on that. It depends on the security plan that you have at your organization, primarily, because you may have an organization where accessing through public port is okay. Being able to have the application of those visible outside of firewall is okay. Few and far between is that the case anymore. So you, at a minimum, have an HTTPS connection that's through a secured port that has a very minimal delivery of HTML, that also has, of course, a user ID and password, and sometimes even multi-factor authentication. Those are all things we do. We have been doing for a long time. The other is we see, too, some people have it local and they put it behind a firewall. So you have VPN to secure the access before you open it back up. And it depends on your organization, how you're deployed and what you're doing, and what the security definitions are for your IT organization. But when we have it in a situation where it can be deployed in the cloud, we'll have all that behind security anyway with user ID and password. But how you access that particular URL sometimes is put behind a VPN. Just depends on your organization, how it structures.
Good. One more technology infrastructure, kind of a basic one, but one of our listeners asked, how is the cloud more resilient than the company server?
That's a great question because I don't know the company server, but to give you an example of other folks. So when we deploy to the cloud using Amazon Web Services, especially with that team, we deploy to zones, and those zones they end up having replication throughout their failovers. So if we do have a failover that happens in a zone, or then we have all the other backups for it to go, and you don't lose anything or any time. If you have a cloud environment like that within your own organization, that's the strength and breadth of AWS, then you may not have that concern. If you have a data center that's in your organization, and you do have a fire, a flood, a hurricane, anything like that, then you may have concern. It just depends. As examples of one of the case studies we did in San Francisco, they, of course, are in a highly prone area for earthquakes, and they wanted to reduce the number of data centers they have and put them onto the cloud because of that. We'll see that in the south, east, in respect to hurricanes that come through. They want to move it to the cloud. And with this particular environment, it's a business continuity disruption that isn't an event like a earthquake or a hurricane, but it's a pandemic. And the reason why they want to move it to the cloud there is because they want their folks doing other things besides managing servers. So it not necessarily is always a resiliency effort, but it's a matter of dealing with the risk that comes through. How resilient the cloud is compared to your own cloud servers is a little bit difficult to answer unless you fully know the environment. But for the most part, we've found more success in how we deploy with Amazon Web Service environments to zones rather than to one particular cloud environment.
Good.
I've got a great for that, Kevin, if you like.
Please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of our mills, most of our mills are located in isolated areas. So our internet pipe that goes into those facilities is a single pipe and tenuous at times, and excavators seem to love to look for those things and dig them up and whatnot. So I showed up on day one of training at one of our mill facilities down in Georgia, in an isolated part of Georgia, and I showed up and they told me the network was down. They had no access to outside or whatnot. But because we had cellular connection, we were able to actually hook up hotspots in our training room, and we were able to access EAM and deliver training on EAM in the absence of a company network. So to me, that was the no-brainer for moving to the cloud. Just gives you that flexibility when other connection mechanisms may fail.
We had a customer a partner that deployed a customer in the Caribbean, and hurricane came and knocked everything out. And they were able to open up the same thing, satellite connections. They were bringing it back up, nothing was lost. But that you're right. Those excavators just always find those critical lines, don't they?
All right, good. Well, we're starting to come to the end of our time here. I'm going to ask each of you a final question. Kevin, they tell us that automation is the key to removing touch points, which remove potential pandemic transmission points. Is that true, and what kind of examples can you share with us?
That's true for many examples of condition assessment. Condition assessment, as an example, you'll go out to take quantitative measures, and in those quantitative measures, those can be obtained through systematic integration, either through process logic control, SCADA integration, more, or system integration that may be already pulling from this, like an OSI PI system, for example, that's pulling this kind of data. The other thing to look at is the qualitatives, though. Qualitative inspection points are typically not able to be brought in a systematic way. A lot of times that has to be done by someone physically staring and looking at the piece of equipment or the environment that it's in or what have you. So it's a lot different than what you would typically find. But for the most part, what we're hearing is that our customers are trying to get the quantitative measures and automate them as much as they can. They were already trying to do that, and now they're taking a lot of that data and bringing it in so they can limit the amount of touch points that are out there as much as they can.
Well, thanks so much, Kevin. Rob, the final question for you is as follows. At looking at your operations, it sounds like the pandemic has changed a lot of things and is continuing to change. Do you think there's any lessons that you've learned or are learning that will help when the next crisis or pandemic comes along?
certainly lessons learned is that despite thinking that we were prepared, when the pandemic hit, there were certain areas where we weren't prepared, and so those are the kinds of things that just help you to improve your preparedness for next time. To make sure that disaster plans are reviewed, updated, especially for different conditions like a pandemic. I don't think we had a tabletop exercise for a pandemic. I had it before the pandemic actually hit. So there's a lot of lessons learned around the preparedness side of things.
Good. Well, thanks so much for the great questions out to our audience, and thanks, Kevin and Rob, for what I thought was a great conversation, and thanks for sharing your time and expertise. I'd like to also extend special thanks to our sponsor, Infor, for sponsoring today's event. And now that we're just about done, we'd like to know how we did. The exit survey will pop up on your screen as soon as the webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it because we use this information to improve our webcasts. Finally, on behalf of Plant Engineering and Infor, thanks for attending. That concludes our webcast, and we'll see you next time.